1981, Harper and Row would publish a book written by Alvin Schwartz, with illustrations by Stephen Gammell, and little did they know, they would create an iconic 3-series horror collection that would open the door into a terrifying genre for so many children, while also being enjoyable to adults. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark are an assemblage of short horrifying stories that strike fear with the words, even more so with the uncanny and dreadful artwork. And dreadful in a good way, of course. And funny enough with the artwork, there was a controversy in 2011 when HarperCollins published an extremely toned down version of all the artwork, as they replaced Stephen Gammell with Brett Helquist. And before I fully rag on the new artwork, or the artist, I would like to say that the revamped artwork is not bad. However, in comparison to what we had originally, it's like going to Italy for fettuccine alfredo and then going to the store for Marie Callender's one. It's not the same. It's like, yeah, one will do, but I've tasted greatness. And I'm sure Brett Helquist's work can be shown to even younger audiences to get them engaged with the horror genre. With all that being said, the new artwork replaced the old artwork. And because so many of the fans, including myself, fell in love with the old artwork, it felt like a slap in the face. Especially because there's examples of the revamped version not even having artwork in it. They just completely deleted Steven's work and were like, yeah, y'all don't need to see anything scary. What is this, a horror book? And on top of that, it really does shift the tone from scary to more goofy. Soon when I play the stories, you're going to discover that a lot of the stories are campy and goofy. With that being said, the illustrations from Steven just enhance the horror feeling. Every single story, even when they're kind of funny, they still have an eerie tone. And with the new artwork by Helquist, I think that tone is lost. Yet the controversy in my whining doesn't really matter, because subsequent releases of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark would go back to Steven's illustrations and use it as his artwork. The book series would sell reportedly 7 million to 12 million copies, as well as appearing on multiple children's bestsellers lists. The books would be kept alive all throughout time, through various sorts of media. Like there's a movie recently that came out in 2019 under the same title as the original book, garnering roughly $105 million. And I personally really enjoyed it. I wish the whole movie was just an anthology movie and it would pick certain stories just to tell. And with that, you can go back in time like early 1900s, late 1800s. Because the stories inside the books always tell folklore from past times. And with the movie, it was very obvious that it was catering to the younger audience. During 2018, when It Chapter 1 came out, a lot of other horror movies at the time were doing young teenage groups and that's going to be the main cast. And they're getting haunted by some spooky thing. I think It Chapter 1 as well as Stranger Things really kicked off that whole trend. And that's not bad, but it just felt like almost every horror movie started doing that. I'm just bitching right now. The 2019 version is definitely worth the watch, especially if you enjoy the book. I personally just really like seeing the illustrations be put to life, because anytime they swung on the adaptations of the monsters, they hit home runs. Another form of media that kept the book series alive are the audiobooks released Voice to Perfection by George S. Irving. He enhances it with an eerie feeling, yet whimsical nature that is just perfect for these retellings of urban legends, as well as some works by Shakespeare, Mark Twain, or Edgar Allan Poe. The Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark series is the best gateway into horror that one can ask for. And today, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone watching, we will be looking at the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark series, as well as listening to some of my favorites. Before we fully jump in, if you're new here, welcome, and if you're returning, it's good to see you again. Alright, let's get into some of my favorite stories from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
The Big Toe. A boy was digging at the edge of the garden when he saw a big toe. He tried to pick it up, but it was stuck to something. So he gave it a good hard jerk, and it came off in his hand. Then he heard something groan and scamper away. The boy took the toe into the kitchen and showed it to his mother. "It looks nice and plump," she said. "I'll put it in the soup, and we'll have it for supper." That night, his father carved the toe into 3 pieces, and they each had a piece. Then they did the dishes, and when it got dark, they went to bed.
Ma!
The boy fell asleep almost at once, but in the middle of the night, a sound awakened him. It was something out in the street. It was a voice, and it was calling to him. "Where is my toe?" It groaned. When the boy heard that, he got very scared, but he thought, "It doesn't know where I am. It will never find me." Then he heard the voice once more, only now it was closer. "Where is my toe, it groaned. The boy pulled the blankets over his head and closed his eyes. I'll go to sleep, he thought. When I wake up, it will be gone. But soon he heard the back door open, and again he heard the voice. Where is my toe? It groaned. Then the boy heard footsteps move through the kitchen, into the dining room, into the living room, into the front hall. Then slowly they climbed the stairs. Closer and closer they came. Soon they were in the upstairs hall. Now they were outside his door. Where is my toe? The voice groaned. His door opened. Shaking with fear, he listened as the footsteps slowly moved through the dark toward his bed. Then they stopped. Where is my toe? The voice groaned. You've got it!
The Big Toe was always one of my favorite stories in the book, and one of the few that genuinely scared me back in the day. I usually just read it for entertainment and to look at the scary pictures and be like, ooh. This story, as with many of these stories and scary stories to tell in the dark, is a retelling of classic folklore, specifically of a revenant. A revenant is a spirit or a reanimated corpse, brought back simply to haunt the living in some way or another. Now looking further into it with the Big Toe, it is a reiteration of The Stolen Farthing, written by the Grimm brothers, who were German scholars and writers. The Stolen Farthing follows, and this is a very quick synopsis of it, it follows a man and his family who are haunted by some ghostly child, who's constantly gnawing at the floorboards with his little ghost hands. Now, the family can't seem to see it, but a poor traveler who they have over for dinner, he can. And that traveler one night is like, hey yo, family, do you guys see that dead child over there crawling at the floorboard? And the family starts questioning whether they should have let this guy in. But after the stranger describes the child, the family realizes that it's their son, who had died weeks ago. So they dug up the floorboards where the ghost child was looking at, and found some farthings. And farthings are just an old UK coin. The coins were meant to be given to the poor by the child. Yet that child kept it hidden in a secret space until his death. That secret space being the floorboards. So the family decides to give the coins to the poor stranger, and the child presumably is allowed to rest after that. Now if that story sounds familiar, there's another adaptation, and I guess it's just more of an adaptation of a Revenant, but still, you probably know this next one, The Telltale Heart, by Edgar Allan Poe. That's where the narrator kills an old man, puts his body under the floorboard, but the quote-unquote heart of the dead man keeps beating louder and louder throughout every single passing day, driving the narrator mad until he can no longer take it and confesses it while revealing the body to police. Now I said quote-unquote because the story is up for interpretation. Either the dead man actually was alive and his heart was just bumping really fast, just so he can get justice for his dead self, or the man was just overcome by guilt, and he made up the thumping sounds in his head because of the guilt, and it drew him mad. And he inevitably gave himself up. That's all to say that Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark has so many folk horror legends adapted to be easily digestible for younger kids, to allure them to the world of horror literature. Also, the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark series has some certified bangers.
The Hearse Song. Don't you ever laugh as the hearse goes by, for you may be the next to die. They wrap you up in a big white sheet, from your head down to your feet. They put you in a big black box and cover you up with dirt and rocks. All goes well for about a week. Then your coffin begins to leak. The worms crawl in, the worms crawl out. The worms play pinochle on your snout. They eat your eyes, they eat your nose. They eat the jelly between your toes. A big green worm with rolling eyes crawls in your stomach and out your eyes. Your stomach turns a slimy green, and pus pours out like whipping cream. You spread it on a slice of bread, and that's what you eat when you are dead.
Sabrina Carpenter eats your heart out. I love the narrator so much. George S. Irving gives it his all. I also enjoy the addition of poems and songs, oriented towards horror. Some of them are very cheesy, but I believe the Hearse Song, as well as some other poems and songs in here, add a fun whimsical charm in the dark world of scary stories to tell in the dark. Also, you can get a good laugh out of some of his pronunciations. It's not like me where I'm just stupid. He purposely makes it sound fun.
The Slithery D. The Slithery D, he came out of the sea. He ate all the others, but he didn't eat me. The Slithery D, he came out of the sea. He ate all the others, but he didn't eat.
This is an ill-placed sex joke, but I love this song. Boy, I tell you, the way he be slurping. Got my Slithery D hungry. And finally, and probably the most well-known, Harold. This comes from the third installment in the trilogy, which just goes to show you that there's memorable stories in every single book.
Harold. When it got hot in the valley, Thomas and Alfred drove their cows up to a cool green pasture in the mountains to graze. Usually they stayed there with the cows for 2 months. Then they brought them down to the valley again. The work was easy enough, but oh, it was boring. All day the 2 men tended their cows. At night they went back to the tiny hut where they lived. They ate supper and worked in the garden and went to sleep. It was always the same. Then Thomas had an idea that changed everything. "Let's make a doll the size of a man," he said. "It would be fun to make, and we could put it in the garden to scare away the birds." "It should look like Harold," Alfred said. Harold was a farmer they both hated. They made the doll out of old sacks stuffed with straw. They gave it a pointy nose like Harold's and tiny eyes like his. Then they added dark hair and a twisted frown. Of course, they also gave it Harold's name. Each morning on their way to the pasture, they tied Harold to a pole in the garden to scare away the birds. Each night they brought him inside so that he wouldn't get ruined if it rained. When they were feeling playful, they would talk to him. One of them might say, "How are the vegetables growing today, Harold?" Then the other, making believe he was Harold, would answer in a crazy voice, "Very slowly." They would both laugh, but not Harold. Whenever something went wrong, they took it out on Harold. They would curse at him, even kick him or punch him. Sometimes one of them would take the food they were eating, which they both were sick of, and smear it on the doll's face. "How do you like that stew, Harold?" he would ask. "Well, you better eat it, or else." Then the 2 men would howl with laughter. One night, after Thomas had wiped Harold's face with food, Harold grunted. "Did you hear that?" Alfred asked. "It was Harold," Thomas said. "I was watching him when it happened. I can't believe it." "How could he grunt?" Alfred asked. "He's just a sack of straw. It's not possible." "Let's throw him in the fire," said Thomas, "and that'll be that." "Let's not do anything stupid," said Alfred. "We don't know what's going on. When we move the cows down, we'll leave him behind. For now, let's just keep an eye on him." So they left Harold sitting in a corner of the hut. They didn't talk to him or take him outside any more. Now and then the doll grunted, but that was all. After a few days, they decided there was nothing to be afraid of. Maybe a mouse or some insects had gotten inside Harold and were making those sounds. So Thomas and Alfred went back to their old ways. Each morning they put Harold out in the garden, and each night they brought him back into the hut. When they felt playful, they joked with him. When they felt mean, they treated him as badly as ever. Then one night, Alfred noticed something that frightened him. "Harold is growing," he said. "I was thinking the same thing," Thomas said. "Maybe it's just our imagination," Alfred replied. "We've been up here on this mountain too long." The next morning, while they were eating, Harold stood up and walked out of the hut. He climbed up on the roof and trotted back and forth like a horse on its hind legs. All day and all night long he trotted like that. In the morning, Harold climbed down and stood in a far corner of the pasture. The men had no idea what he would do next. They were afraid. They decided to take the cows down into the valley that same day. When they left, Harold was nowhere in sight. They felt as if they had escaped a great danger and began joking and singing. But when they had gone only a mile or two, they realized they had forgotten to bring the milking stools. Neither one wanted to go back for them, but the stools would cost a lot to replace. "There really is nothing to be afraid of," they told one another. "After all, what could a doll do?" They drew straws to see which one would go back. It was Thomas. "I'll catch up with you," he said, and Alfred walked on toward the valley. When Alfred came to a rise in the path, he looked back for Thomas. He did not see him anywhere, but he did see Harold. The doll was on the roof of the hut again. As Alfred watched, Harold kneeled and stretched out a bloody skin to dry in the sun.
Harold is another revenant-type folktale. Again, just some sort of ghoul or spirit who comes back to haunt someone. And with the story Harold, it turns that revenant into a haunting scarecrow. Iconic for not only the storytelling, especially for me, the stomping on the rooftop, that utterly terrified me when I was younger. I remember getting this book series during the school fair, and the school fair always happened around November, close to Christmas time. And I distinctly remember thinking, what if I don't know it's Santa or Harold up on the roof? By the way, Santa is real, but he is dangerous, so don't let him come into your house. And the haunting imagery by Stephen Gamble just furthered my fear and love for scarecrows. I also enjoyed the movie's adaptation of Harold. Granted, I still would have loved an anthology movie, especially where Harold, the story, was just taken back into like the early 1900s, where you don't have social media or iPhones or anything like that. It's just the old school farmers, stuck with some demon scarecrow. Yet that doesn't take away from the fact that Harold is probably the most well-known story of scary stories to tell in the dark. I think scarecrows are sick, not only because they can be scary, but symbolically, they represent the new harvest after the cold winter. Which, if you want to get corny with it, that can represent overcoming obstacles. But scarecrows also just look fucking sick. Alright, this video is a lot of Glaze, and yeah, whatever, deal with it. You can go find people who want to be negative Nancy's out there. But the book series of scary stories to tell in the dark influenced my plump little ass so heavily, and I really wanted to just shine a spotlight on some of my favorite horror media. And if you enjoyed my yapping, then leaving a like really helps me out. And if you enjoy horror content, then that's what my whole channel is. So maybe think about subscribing. I think the audiobook is definitely worth the watch, especially this spooky season. And if it's not spooky season when you're watching this, then I don't know, man, you got 3 hours to kill? You wanna listen to something at work? Listen to Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. It's on YouTube, and it will be linked down below. I can't overstate how much I look at this book series and see the influence that it had on me. I personally think that the artwork itself got me into the niche of horror called melt horror, and it's pretty self-explanatory. It's where things melt, usually people, and it's yucky. Like, I love Junji Ito's work, and I see a lot of resemblance with Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. My favorite type of horror media is short-form scary stories. I love listening to people like Mr. Nightmare or B-Busta. Granted, the people who write the stories on Reddit suck at writing, but it's fine. But I love when horror is short and sweet and leaves you wanting more, while also fulfilling your hunger of fear. Alright, if you're watching this before Halloween, happy Halloween, and if you're watching this after Halloween, fuck you.